don't even know how to start this. Honestly, I wasn't planning to ever write this down, let alone post it somewhere public like Reddit. But I need to get this off my chest because it's eating me alive, and maybe if someone else reads this, they'll never do something as stupid as I did. I fucked up, like royally. There's no coming back from what I've done, and I don't think I deserve to either. It started a couple of months ago. Life wasn't terrible, but it wasn't good either. You know how it is, waking up every day with that low-grade, gnawing dread about the same bullshit routine. Work, bills, arguments over what to watch on Netflix, putting up a front on Instagram, pretending everything's fine when it's not. I'm 35, married, and have 2 kids. My wife, Lisa, is fine. She's good to me. She doesn't deserve this. My kids, Ellie, she's 6, and Ryan, he's 4, are the sweetest little gremlins you'll ever meet. They've got this habit of making me laugh when I'm in my worst moods, and God, I don't deserve them either. But I was just done. I don't know how else to say it. I was sick of it all. The credit card debt piling up from stupid Amazon purchases, the fights about the thermostat, the unspoken tension about how we hadn't had sex in 6 months. I was sick of my boss breathing down my neck because I was underperforming. Sick of pretending I wasn't miserable every second of every day. I'd been on some dark corners of the internet before, nothing serious, just curiosity about the weird shit people post on forums and stuff. I don't even remember how I first stumbled onto the site. It was one of those Tor browser things you always hear about in podcasts or documentaries. The dark web. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I was just browsing, killing time. That's when I saw it. A thread titled something like Professional Problem Solvers, Discrete Services Available. It was written in this no-nonsense tone, like they were advertising lawn care or dog walking, only it wasn't. These were people offering to make your problems go away permanently. Now, I know how that sounds. You're probably thinking, why the fuck would you even click that? I don't have a good answer. Morbid curiosity, a kind of sick fascination with how far the internet can go, maybe a little voice in the back of my head whispering, what if? The post had a link to some chat room thing. You had to make an account first. Fake username, obviously. I signed up as Wasted Potential 33 because, well, that's how I felt. The chat was just as professional as the ad, way too professional for something this dark. There were menus like it was a goddamn restaurant. You could pick your service, from intimidation to elimination. The prices were listed in Bitcoin, and let me tell you, they weren't cheap. And then there was a chat box where you could speak with a representative. It didn't feel real, you know, like it was all too clinical, too businesslike. But then again I figured, what better way to do something illegal than to make it feel boring and ordinary? I typed something stupid like, how does this work? The response came almost immediately. We need details. Targets, location, desired outcome. Payment up front, no refunds. At that moment, something shifted in me. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I was trying to prove to myself that it was fake, that it was just some scam or bullshit story I could laugh about later. Maybe I just wanted to see how far it could go. So I told them. I said I wanted a package deal. Me, my wife, my kids. All of us. I even gave them our address, my fucking address. I said I wanted it to look like a robbery gone wrong. They quoted me a price that made my stomach turn. About 3 Bitcoin, which at the time was close to $75,000. I almost closed the browser right then and there. It was insane. I was insane, but I didn't. I don't know if it was the depression, the boredom, or just some fucked up curiosity, but I stayed. I told them I didn't have that kind of money, and they said there were options. Payment plans, lower cost alternatives, if I was okay with something messier or less subtle. I ended up agreeing to something mid-tier, a clean operation for half the price. They wanted half up front. Now, I'm not rich, but I'm not broke either. I had a savings account with a little over $20,000 in it, money we'd been putting away for a family vacation to Disney World. I figured if I transferred some of it to a crypto wallet, Lisa wouldn't notice right away. I mean, I'd been the one managing our finances ever since she stopped working to take care of the kids. She trusted me. That night, after everyone went to bed, I made the transfer. It was easier than I thought. Too easy. The Bitcoin went through and I got a confirmation email. Your order has been processed. You will be contacted shortly. It didn't feel real. None of it did. I went to bed thinking I'd wake up the next day and laugh at myself for falling for some elaborate scam. But then the emails started. The first one was just a confirmation. Operation scheduled for date redacted. Ensure you are present at the designated location. I won't tell you the date, but it was exactly 2 weeks from the day I placed the order. The second email came with instructions. Behave as you normally would. Do not warn the targets. Do not interfere. Failure to comply will result in immediate consequences. That was the moment I realized it wasn't a scam. These people were serious. I'm not proud of what I did after that. I panicked, obviously. I tried emailing them back, saying I wanted to cancel, that I'd made a mistake, that I wasn't thinking clearly. Their response was short and to the point. No cancellations, no refunds. Any attempt to interfere will result in additional charges. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I started jumping every time the doorbell rang or I heard footsteps outside. Lisa noticed, of course. She asked me if everything was okay, and I lied. I said it was work stress. The worst part was looking at my kids. Every time Ellie came running to show me one of her drawings or Ryan crawled into my lap to watch Bluey, I felt like I was going to puke. I'd made a deal to have them killed. My babies. The only good thing I'd ever done in my miserable fucking life. I wanted to go to the police, but how could I? Hi, officer. I paid a hitman to kill my family. Can you help me stop it? They'd lock me up in a second, and maybe they should. So I did the only thing I could think of. I started preparing. I bought a security system, a top-of-the-line ADT setup with cameras and motion sensors and everything. I told Lisa it was for peace of mind. She thought I was being paranoid, but she didn't argue. I also bought a gun. I'd never owned one before, and honestly, the idea of having one in the house scared the shit out of me. But I figured if I couldn't cancel the hit, maybe I could protect my family when the time came. The days leading up to the operation were hell. I barely left the house. I couldn't focus on anything. Lisa kept asking me what was wrong, and I kept brushing her off. I was too afraid to tell her the truth. And then the night came. I'll never forget it. It was a Tuesday. Lisa made spaghetti for dinner, and we put the kids to bed around 8:30. I stayed up, sitting in the living room with the lights off, clutching the gun like a lunatic. Every sound made my heart stop. It happened around 2 a.m. I heard a noise, soft, deliberate, like someone trying not to be heard. They were here. Let me just say this right off the bat. No amount of preparation can save you when something like this happens. You can convince yourself you'll be ready, that you'll have some heroic plan in place, but when the moment comes, you're a fucking deer in the headlights. When I heard that sound, footsteps, deliberate but quiet, my body froze. I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe for a second. My first thought was that maybe I was hearing things. Maybe I'd been so sleep-deprived, so racked with paranoia that my mind was playing tricks on me. But then I heard it again, closer this time. I had my phone on the couch next to me. I grabbed it with trembling hands and opened the ADT app to check the cameras. The screen lit up, showing all the live feeds from outside the house. The front yard was empty. The backyard was still. The driveway showed nothing but Lisa's Honda Odyssey and my old Toyota Corolla. But then I saw it. Movement on the porch. There was a man standing just out of range of the porch light, right at the edge of the camera's field of view. He was wearing a black hoodie, the kind with drawstrings, and he had the hood pulled up so I couldn't see his face. He wasn't looking at the door, he was looking directly at the camera. My stomach dropped. He lifted a finger to his lips in a shh motion, and then he stepped back out of view. I don't even remember standing up, but the next thing I knew, I was on my feet with the gun in my hand. My legs felt like jelly. My mouth was dry as hell, like I'd swallowed a bucket of sand. I stared at the screen, waiting for him to show up on one of the other cameras, but he didn't. Instead, I heard the back door creak. You know that sound, the slow, drawn-out squeak of old hinges. That's what I heard coming from the kitchen. I spun around so fast I nearly dropped the gun. The back door was locked. I knew it was locked. I'd checked it 3 times before I sat down. But now it was open, just a crack. I couldn't think. I couldn't fucking think. My first instinct was to run upstairs and grab Lisa and the kids, but I was too scared to move. What if they were already inside? What if I led them right to my family? The house was dead silent. Not the normal kind of silence, with the hum of the fridge or the creak of the floorboards. This was wrong. Like the whole house was holding its breath. I crept toward the kitchen, gripping the gun so tightly my knuckles turned white. My hands were shaking so bad I was afraid I'd accidentally pull the trigger. When I got to the doorway, I peeked around the corner. The kitchen was empty. The back door was wide open now, swinging slightly in the breeze. I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I stepped closer, just enough to look outside. The backyard was dark, lit only by the faint glow of the motion-activated light over the garage. I could see the swing set we'd put up for the kids, the little garden box Lisa had been so proud of, the trees swaying in the wind. But there was no one there. That's when I realized I'd fucked up. The second I turned back toward the living room, I saw him. The man from the porch. He was standing just inside the front door, staring at me. My brain short-circuited. I raised the gun, but my finger wouldn't move. He didn't lunge at me, didn't say a word. He just stood there, watching me, his head tilted slightly to the side. I could see his face now, kind of. It was covered with one of those black neoprene ski masks, the kind that only leaves your eyes and mouth visible. And those eyes, God, I'll never forget them. They weren't angry or frantic or even cruel. They were calm, cold, like he was just doing a job and I was the paperwork he needed to file. I opened my mouth to scream, to yell, to say something, but no sound came out. Then I heard more footsteps. 2 people stepped out of the hallway leading to the stairs, another man and a woman. They were dressed just like the first guy, black hoodies, ski masks, gloves. The woman was holding a crowbar, the guy had what looked like a hunting knife, and then, from upstairs, "Daddy!" It was Ellie's voice. I snapped out of it. Without thinking, I raised the gun again, aiming it at the first guy. I don't know if I was planning to shoot or just scare them, but before I could do anything, I felt something hit me in the back of the head, hard. I don't even remember falling. 1 second I was standing there, and the next I was on the floor, my head spinning. I could feel blood dripping down the back of my neck. My vision blurred, but I could still hear them moving around, hear their footsteps on the stairs. And then Ellie screamed. That sound will haunt me for the rest of my life. I tried to get up, but my arms wouldn't work. Everything was spinning. I felt someone grab my wrist and drag me across the floor. My gun was gone. I don't even remember dropping it. I was pulled into the dining room and dumped against the wall like a sack of garbage. When my vision finally cleared, I saw the woman crouching in front of me. She wasn't looking at me, though. She was holding something. My phone. "You made the payment," she said, her voice muffled slightly by the mask. "You agreed to the terms." I didn't mean it," I stammered. My voice sounded foreign to me, high-pitched and trembling. "It was a mistake. Please don't hurt them. Don't hurt my kids." She tilted her head, almost like she was curious. "It's not up to me," she said. "Orders are orders." The man with the knife appeared in the doorway, and I saw something dark on the blade, something red. I lost it. I started screaming, thrashing, trying to get away, but the woman grabbed my face and slammed my head back against the wall. "Stop," she hissed, "or I'll make it worse." The first man walked in then, dragging something behind him. It was Lisa. She wasn't moving. Her hair was matted with blood, and her arm was bent at a sickening angle. I wanted to scream her name, but the words wouldn't come. I just sat there, shaking, crying, useless. The woman stood up and looked at the others. "Upstairs," she said. "Finish the job." The two men nodded and headed back toward the stairs. "No!" I screamed, finally finding my voice. "Please, I'll do anything. Take me. Just take me." The woman turned back to me, her eyes narrowing. She didn't say anything, but the look on her face was enough to make my blood run cold. "Stay here," she said, and then she followed the others upstairs. I don't even know how I'm still alive right now. I swear to God, part of me wishes they'd just killed me right then and there. Because what came next? What I heard? I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. When they went upstairs, I tried to move. I don't know how. I was dizzy as hell, and my whole body felt like it had been run over by a truck. But the thought of them getting to my kids lit something inside me. A tiny spark of fight. I couldn't let it happen. I wouldn't. I tried crawling at first. My legs were useless, so I dragged myself across the floor like some kind of pathetic worm. My arms kept slipping because of the blood pooling under me. I didn't even realize it was my own at first. My head felt like it was full of broken glass. I didn't care. I just needed to get upstairs. The house was filled with noise now, thudding footsteps, the sound of furniture being knocked over, and Ellie's screams. Oh my God, her screams. They were the kind of screams that only a child can make. High-pitched, raw, pure terror. She was begging for me. "Daddy! Daddy, help me!" Over and over, I reached the base of the stairs, grabbed the railing, and tried to pull myself up. My arms gave out almost immediately, and I fell back onto the floor. My vision went dark for a second, and I thought that was it, that I'd black out completely. But the thought of what they might be doing to my kids jolted me awake. "Get up," I muttered to myself. "Get the fuck up." I don't know how I did it, but I managed to drag myself up the first step, then the next, and the next. My whole body was screaming in protest, but I forced myself to keep going. I reached the top of the stairs just as Ryan started crying. His voice was muffled, like he was being smothered. My baby boy, my little guy who still sleeps with a stuffed dinosaur every night. The one who always tells me, "Good night, Daddy, love you," no matter how tired he is. I couldn't let them hurt him. I couldn't. I pulled myself toward the kids' room, leaving a smear of blood on the carpet behind me. The door was open just a crack, and I could hear shuffling inside. And then, God help me, I heard the woman's voice. "Shh, it's okay," she cooed, like she was trying to soothe the baby. "It'll be over soon." Something inside me snapped. I didn't care about the pain or the fact that I didn't have the gun anymore. I threw myself at the door, slamming it open with my shoulder. The scene inside will haunt me for the rest of my life. Ellie was sitting on her bed, her arms wrapped around her knees, shaking like a leaf. Her face was streaked with tears, and her lip was bleeding, probably from biting down too hard.
Ryan was on the floor, his little body curled up into a ball. One of the men, the guy with the knife, was standing over him, holding the blade to his throat. The woman turned to look at me, surprised, for the first time since this whole nightmare started. "Persistent little fucker, aren't you?" she said. I didn't answer. I couldn't. All I could do was look at my kids, at how small and helpless they looked, and feel this overwhelming wave of guilt. This was my fault. Every second of this was happening because of me. I tried to stand, but my legs gave out again, and I collapsed onto the floor. The woman stepped closer, crouching down in front of me, like she was about to give me a lecture. "This is why we tell clients not to interfere," she said, her tone almost scolding. "You're just making it harder on yourself. And them?" She tilted her head toward Ellie, who was sobbing quietly now, her little body shaking uncontrollably. "Please," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Please don't hurt them. I'll do anything. Kill me. Just kill me instead." The woman laughed, a cold, joyless sound. "You really don't get it, do you?" she said. "This isn't about you anymore. You paid for a service, and we're here to provide it. End of story." She stood up and motioned to the guy with the knife. "Finish it," she said. "No!" I screamed, lurching forward with everything I had left. I grabbed her ankle and pulled as hard as I could, sending her sprawling onto the floor. She let out a string of curses and kicked at me, but I didn't care. I just needed to buy a few more seconds. The guy with the knife turned toward me, his face a mask of annoyance. He raised the blade, and for a split second I thought, this is it. This is how I die. But then Ellie did something I'll never forget. She screamed, "Leave my daddy alone," and threw her lamp at the guy's head. It wasn't a big lamp, just one of those cheap ones from IKEA, but it was heavy enough to make him stumble. The knife clattered to the floor, and Ryan scrambled away, sobbing. "Run!" I yelled at Ellie. "Take Ryan and run!" She hesitated, her big blue eyes wide with fear, but then she grabbed her brother's hand and bolted out the door. The woman screamed, "Stop them!" But I tackled her before she could get up. I didn't have a plan, didn't know what the hell I was doing. I just threw every ounce of strength I had left into keeping her down. She fought like a wild animal, clawing at my face and screaming obscenities. I could feel her nails digging into my skin, ripping at my cheeks and forehead, but I didn't care. All I could think about was giving my kids enough time to get out of the house. The guy with the knife recovered quickly, though. Too quickly. Before I knew it, he was on me, grabbing me by the back of my shirt and yanking me off the woman. And that's when I saw the third man. He was standing in the doorway, holding Ellie in one arm and Ryan in the other. Both of them were kicking and screaming, but he didn't seem to notice. "We're wasting time," he said, his voice deep and emotionless. "Let's wrap this up." "No!" I screamed, my voice cracking. "Please, just take me. I'll pay more. Double, triple, whatever you want." The woman wiped the blood off her face and looked at me with pure disgust. "You don't get it," she said. "This isn't about the money anymore. It's about the principle." And then she nodded to the man in the doorway. "Do it?" I've replayed this part in my head 1,000,000 times. Every scream, every noise, every fucking second. I can't stop it. It's like my mind's stuck on a loop, forcing me to relive the moment I lost everything. The man holding Ellie and Ryan didn't say anything. He just nodded back at the woman, like he was waiting for her command. Ellie was still screaming, thrashing around in his arms, kicking at him with her little feet. Ryan wasn't even fighting anymore. He'd gone completely limp, his face buried in the man's shoulder, sobbing quietly like he'd just given up. I tried to get up again, but the guy with the knife slammed me back down onto the floor. I felt the air rush out of my lungs as his knee pressed into my chest. He wasn't even looking at me. He was staring at the woman, waiting for her to give the next order. and she was just standing there, calm as a fucking statue, brushing the dust off her hoodie like this was nothing more than a minor inconvenience, like murdering a family in cold blood was just another Tuesday for her. "Please," I begged again. My voice was broken, hoarse, barely above a whisper. "Please don't hurt them. They're just kids." The woman crouched down in front of me, close enough that I could smell her cheap perfume, some sickly sweet floral scent that made my stomach churn. She looked me in the eyes and smiled. "Kids die all the time," she said. "Accidents, illnesses, wrong place, wrong time. It's sad, sure, but that's life. No one's going to remember this in a year." She reached out and patted my cheek like I was a dog that had just misbehaved. "You, though? You'll be famous. The media's going to have a field day with this one. Father hires Hitman to slaughter his own family. People love a story like that." I felt like I was going to throw up. This wasn't just about the money. It never was. These people weren't just professionals. They were sadists, monsters. They wanted me to suffer, to watch while they tore my family apart and left me alive to take the blame. The woman stood up and gestured toward the guy holding Ellie and Ryan. "Start with the girl," she said. "Make it quick." The man nodded, and I swear to God I've never seen anyone move so fast. He carried Ellie to the bed and pinned her down with one hand. She was screaming so loud now, screaming for me, for her mum, for anyone to help her. I lost it, completely fucking lost it. I thrashed against the guy holding me down, clawing at his arms, trying to buck him off me, but he was too strong. He grabbed my head and slammed it into the floor, and for a second, everything went black. When my vision cleared, the man with the knife was standing over me. His face was inches from mine, his eyes cold and empty. "If you don't stop," he said, his voice low and even, "I'll cut out your tongue and feed it to you." I froze. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. I just lay there, staring up at him, feeling the weight of his knee pressing into my ribs. And then I heard the sound that broke me completely. Ellie, screaming, but not words anymore, just pure, raw, animalistic terror. I twisted my head as much as I could, just enough to see what was happening. The man was holding her down with one hand, and in the other he had a knife, one of those long, curved hunting knives with a serrated edge. He wasn't even looking at her. He was looking at me, making sure I was watching. I started screaming again, screaming so loud my throat felt like it was going to tear apart. "Stop, please, God, stop!" But he didn't. He pressed the knife against her throat, and Ellie, my baby girl. She froze. She went completely still, her little chest rising and falling in short, panicked breaths. And then I heard a voice. It wasn't mine, it wasn't Lisa's, it wasn't the killer's. It was coming from somewhere else, somewhere far away but close at the same time. A man's voice. Calm, steady. "Enough," it said. Everyone froze. The guy holding Ellie lowered the knife and the man with Ryan let go of him, dropping him onto the bed. Even the woman, the one who seemed like she was in charge, stiffened and looked around, her eyes wide. The voice came again, louder this time. I said, "Enough." It was coming from the hallway. Everyone turned to look. I couldn't see who it was at first. The light in the hallway was dim, casting long, deep shadows. But then a figure stepped forward and I felt my heart stop. It was a man, tall and thin, dressed in a black suit that looked almost wrong, like it didn't quite fit him. His face was pale, almost sickly, and his eyes were the strangest color I'd ever seen, this dull, grayish green that didn't look human. The woman stepped forward, her voice shaking for the first time. "This isn't part of the deal," she said. "Who the fuck are you?" The man didn't answer. He just stood there, staring at her. And then he smiled. It wasn't a normal smile. It was too wide, too perfect, like someone had carved it into his face. The woman took a step back, her confidence crumbling. "This house is private property," she said. "We were hired. We—" The man held up a hand, and she stopped mid-sentence. "You've already failed," he said, his voice echoing like it was coming from every corner of the room. "Now leave." The woman opened her mouth to argue, but before she could say anything, the man tilted his head slightly and she froze. "I don't mean—" She hesitated. "I mean she literally froze, like someone had pressed pause on her. She wasn't breathing, wasn't blinking, just standing there, completely still. The other two men tried to move, but the same thing happened to them. They froze in place, their bodies rigid and unnatural. And then the man in the suit looked at me. "You brought this upon yourself," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. "But you won't be spared." I wanted to say something, to ask who he was or what he wanted, but before I could, the room went dark. Not like someone turned off the lights, darker than that, like the darkness swallowed everything, the walls, the floor, the air. I couldn't see, couldn't hear, couldn't feel anything, and then just as suddenly as it started, it was over. When the light came back, the woman and the two men were gone. So was the man in the suit. It was just me, lying on the floor, staring at the ceiling. Ellie and Ryan were huddled together on the bed, shaking and crying but alive. And Lisa. Lisa was still on the floor downstairs. I don't know how long I stayed there on the floor. Could have been minutes, could have been hours. Time didn't make sense anymore. My body felt like it was made of lead, and my brain was running on autopilot, replaying the last hour over and over again like some fucked up home movie. The kids were safe. That should have been enough. But it wasn't. Because Lisa was dead. I don't even remember crawling back downstairs, but somehow I ended up next to her. She was lying there in the middle of the living room, her hair matted with blood, her skin pale and waxy. Her eyes were half open, staring at nothing. I'd seen dead bodies before, my dad's funeral, my grandmother's open casket, but this was different. This was Lisa, my wife, the woman who put up with all my bullshit, who stayed with me even when I didn't deserve it. And now she was gone. I didn't even have the strength to cry. I just sat there next to her, staring at the broken shell of the person I loved most in the world. It was my fault. All of it. Ellie and Ryan were still upstairs, whispering to each other in that shaky, hiccuping way kids do after they've cried too hard. I should have gone to them, held them, told them it was going to be okay, but I couldn't. I didn't have the right. Not after what I'd done. I don't know how long I stayed like that, but eventually I heard footsteps. At first, I thought it was the kids, but these were too heavy, too deliberate. My heart stopped. Had they come back? I looked up, and there he was. The man in the suit. He was standing in the middle of the living room like he'd always been there, his hands in his pockets, that same unnatural smile on his face. "What do you want?" I croaked. My voice was barely audible, more like a dry whisper. The man tilted his head, studying me like I was some kind of specimen in a jar. "It's not about what I want," he said. "It's about what you owe." "Oh," I repeated, my voice cracking. "What the fuck are you talking about?" He crouched down so we were at eye level. I could see him better now, and the closer I looked, the less human he seemed. His skin wasn't just pale, it was almost translucent, with faint blue veins running just beneath the surface. And his eyes, they weren't greyish-green like I'd thought before. They were empty, completely black, like looking into a void. "You made a deal," he said, his voice calm but carrying an edge that made my blood run cold. "You paid for a service, and that service was rendered, but there's still a balance to settle."
I didn't mean it, I stammered, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I didn't know. Intent is irrelevant, he interrupted, his tone sharp enough to cut through steel. The moment you transferred the money, the contract was sealed. A life for a life. I stared at him, my mind racing to make sense of what he was saying. What does that mean? Or what do you... He stood up, towering over me like some kind of goddamn statue. Your wife, he said, gesturing toward Lisa's body with a slight nod. She was the first payment. A down payment, if you will. My stomach turned. I could feel bile rising in my throat. But you still owe more, he continued. Much more. No, I whispered, shaking my head violently. No, you can't. Please, I'll do anything. Take me, take my life, just leave my kids alone. The man's smile widened, stretching impossibly far across his face. Oh, you misunderstand, he said. You're not the one who gets to decide. The debt must be paid one way or another. The only question is how much you're willing to sacrifice. I'll give you anything, I screamed, my voice cracking. Anything you want. Just tell me what to do. The man crouched down again, his face inches from mine. I could feel the cold radiating off him, like standing next to an open freezer. Anything? He repeated, his voice dripping with mockery. I nodded frantically. Yes, anything. Just don't hurt my kids. He stared at me for a long moment, his black, empty eyes boring into mine. And then he stood up, brushing off his suit. Very well, he said. I'll give you a choice. He raised his hand and suddenly the room changed. 1 second I was sitting in my living room. The next I was in a hospital. Not a real one. This place was too clean, too sterile, like it was built to mimic a hospital without actually being one. The walls were stark white, the floors polished to a mirror-like shine, and the air smelled faintly of antiseptic. In front of me, there were 2 beds. Ellie was lying on one. Ryan was on the other. Both of them were unconscious, their little bodies hooked up to machines that beeped softly in the background. I spun around, looking for the man in the suit, but he was gone. His voice, however, echoed all around me. Choose, he said. What? I yelled, my voice cracking. You want to save them, he said, his tone calm and cold. But you can't save both. One must stay, and one will go. That is the price you must pay. My head was spinning. I stumbled toward the beds, looking back and forth between Ellie and Ryan. Please, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. Please, don't make me do this. There was no response, just silence, broken only by the soft beeping of the machines. I collapsed onto my knees, sobbing uncontrollably. How the fuck was I supposed to choose? Ellie was my firstborn, my little artist, who loved drawing me pictures of rainbows and unicorns. Ryan was my baby boy, my curious little adventurer who could spend hours digging in the backyard for worms. How do you decide which one of your kids gets to live? I screamed until my throat felt raw, but no one answered. And then I heard Ellie's voice. Daddy? I looked up, and she was staring at me, her big blue eyes filled with confusion and fear. What's happening, Daddy? Where's Mommy? I opened my mouth to answer, but before I could, Ryan stirred on the other bed. Daddy, he mumbled, his voice groggy and weak. I was frozen, paralyzed. My heart felt like it was being ripped apart. I can't, I whispered, shaking my head. I can't do this. Please, don't make me do this. But deep down, I knew there was no other way. And then the man's voice came again, calm and cold as ever. Decide. I wish I could tell you what happened after that. I wish I could say I found a way out, that I beat the system, that my family and I lived happily ever after. But that's not how this story ends, because I did decide. I won't tell you who I chose. That's between me and whatever's waiting for me when I die. But when it was over, I woke up back in my house. Ellie or Ryan, whichever one I didn't choose, was gone. Not dead, not hurt, just gone. Like they'd never existed.
No photos, no toys, no memories except for the ones burned into my brain. Lisa was still dead, though. Her body was lying on the floor, cold and lifeless, a cruel reminder of everything I'd lost. The man in the suit was gone too, no sign he'd ever been there. Now it's just me and the one I saved. They don't know, they don't remember. As far as they're concerned, this is how life has always been. But I remember. And every time I look at them, I see the one I left behind. I haven't slept since it happened. I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I hear the man's voice, calm and cruel, echoing in the back of my mind. The debt is paid, for now. I don't know what he meant by for now, but I'm terrified to find out. And the worst part? Sometimes late at night, I hear footsteps.